How's it going, everybody? This is Cameron White with White Light Astrology, and welcome to your 2020 year ahead horoscope for Capricorn, Sun, and Rising. Thank you guys so much for being here and liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you guys. In this video, we're going to be going over all of the major transits of 2020 by each quarter and how they'll be affecting you. And now, while there is a lot of astrology happening next year, we're going to be briefly going over the major events so you guys have a general idea of what's going to be going on for you guys this year. Now, if you would like a more in-depth and specific analysis of what's going to be happening for you for 2020, please be sure to check out my website where you guys can purchase a year ahead reading from me, where I'm going to be going over all of the specific transits and the big major events that are going to be affecting you specifically for your chart for 2020. And if you like this year ahead horoscope and you also like weekly horoscopes and monthly horoscopes, please be sure to check out my page and subscribe for all of the latest astrology info and updates. And also follow me on Twitter if you guys like to talk about astrology and engage with me, as well as a bunch of other astrologers. If you're not on astrology Twitter, get on there already. And if you'd like to support me and my work and get access to exclusive content and knowledge about astrology, be sure to check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/whitelightastrology. And now, with all that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the horoscope. So before we actually start 2020, we're ending 2019 off with Jupiter entering Capricorn. Now, Jupiter is the planet of good luck, fortune. He wants to bring you gifts. He wants you to believe and have faith. And Jupiter is a pretty positive planet. However, the problem is Jupiter finds itself in its sign of fall when it goes into Capricorn, meaning Jupiter doesn't have all of the resources available for it to use for it to get the job done that it wants to. So Jupiter basically has to use what it has given to it, and it's not a whole lot, but Jupiter usually makes the best out of a pretty crappy situation anyway. Now, Jupiter is going to be in Capricorn for the whole year of 2020, and this is important for you guys because this is going to be in your first house of your sense of self. Now, the first house is all about you, so it is literally about you, how you look, how you act. And Jupiter, being this planet of, awesomeness, basically, going through your first house, is really positive. You guys are going to start feeling a lot more optimistic, a lot more like yourself, just a lot more happier, a lot more expressive. The only thing is, though, while Jupiter's in Capricorn at the same time with it being in its sign of fall, this is kind of about you utilizing what you do have for yourself in order to be that optimistic person, in order to step more into that. You kind of have to look at the glass half full in this case. Now, we are starting 2020 off, though, with the big Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Now, this is a really big transit. It's a really big deal. I would definitely recommend looking into this more for your own sake, because I don't have enough time today to go into the specifics for it. But this is a very big deal, and as Saturn comes up to conjoin Pluto, we have the planet Saturn of, limitations, restrictions, responsibilities, authority, maturity, coming up to this planet that is all about destruction and chaos. And I'm sure you guys have been very aware of Saturn and Pluto going through your first house over this past couple years. There's been a lot of changes to who you are and how you view yourself and how you react and respond. But as Saturn comes up to conjoin Pluto, this is about addressing like the issue at its source and kind of contaminating the fire and putting it out, taking all of the bullshit and putting it in one spot so you can get rid of it. And that's kind of like how we're starting 2020, but this theme is going to continue out for the rest of this year. But as Saturn conjoins Pluto, this is when to implement those changes. Now, then we get into the first of 3 Mercury retrogrades you're going to be having this year. The first one being in Pisces. And of course, Mercury retrogrades are all about reviewing, rethinking, replanning. With it being in the sign of Pisces, which is Mercury's detriment sign, it doesn't operate super well there. This can be a little bit more of a confusing, a little bit more annoying and frustrating Mercury retrograde than normal, involved with, miscommunications and stuff like that. It's a Mercury retrograde. There's always miscommunication somewhere. But this one might be a little bit more frustrating than usual. The only thing with this one is it's going to be in your 3rd house. Now, the 3rd house rules a lot of different things. It rules short distance travel, like cars. It rules siblings. It rules neighbors, like things in your immediate environment that you have accessibility to. The 3rd house is also learning and teaching, as well as writing style, speaking style, how you vocalize those things. So it's very mercurial in its nature. But as Mercury retrogrades right here, this might be where you start rethinking more of the things that you're saying. Or what I really like to use as the 3rd house is how to utilize yourself. Like the 1st house is who you are, the 2nd house is what you have, the 3rd house is how you use it. And so this Mercury retrograde might be a time of rethinking and replanning. How do you really utilize yourself? But then we get into March where we have Saturn entering Aquarius. Thank the Lord, Saturn's finally not in your first house anymore. That's going to be a huge sigh of relief for you guys. Saturn's not done in Capricorn, but you do get a small little break. Now, Saturn is going into Aquarius, which means it's going into your second house, which means Saturn's themes of responsibility, walls, barriers, restrictions, and consolidation is going away from your first house of your sense of self and going towards your second house of your money and what money you do have, what money you do own, the physical possessions that you do have. And I don't want you to fear about this because Saturn's not always a bad planet. Saturn is very constructive and wants you to be mature, wants you to be responsible and have some discipline. So the switch really comes from being centered or, having to be responsible about yourself, be more self-disciplined. This is where it gets focused on how do you do that now with your money and the things that you own and possess. And then we end the first quarter of 2020 with Jupiter conjoining Pluto. And like I said before, with Jupiter being in Capricorn, being us, kind of utilizing whatever we have and making the best out of a shitty situation, Jupiter conjoining Pluto is kind of like, you might have to remain extremely faithful to believe in it because it may not look good at first. Now, as we get to the later part of this year is when things are really going to turn around for that, and I'll explain that later on. But as Jupiter conjoins Pluto, where can you change your faith and what your beliefs are about yourself to where you can really squeeze the most out of the juice or get the most juice out of whatever fruit that you guys are trying to squeeze from? And Jupiter's in your first house this year. Use it as much as you can. Squeeze as much juice as you can out of it. And as Jupiter conjoins Pluto, this is going to be the time of really going at, hey, we may have to last for, 4 months, but we only have these 3 oranges for orange juice, so you're going to have to squeeze as much juice as you can out of those to make it last. Then as we get into the second quarter is when we're going to have the nodes switch signs right during eclipse season. Now the nodes are little points on a chart that show us where the eclipses are going to be at any given time, and the nodes are going to be moving into Gemini and Sagittarius, where the themes really start to change. And the North Node is all about our sense of direction, where we're going, what we're hungry for, where we're trying to go. And as it goes into Gemini, this is focusing more on information, communication, what we understand and what's known to us at this moment, what's black and white. And the South Node being where we came from or where our past was or what we're kind of starting to stray away from is going to be in Sagittarius, which is about our beliefs, our philosophy, our faith. And so as the South Node goes into Sagittarius, this is going to be a time of kind of letting go of whatever it is that we might be believing. And with the South Node going into Sagittarius, this is happening in your 12th house of repressed and unacknowledged parts of yourself, things that you may find hidden, unacknowledged parts of yourself. So during this time, you might come up with beliefs that you didn't even know that you had that may not be serving you any longer. But the North Node being in Gemini is helping you focus on what do you know, what can you understand, what can you learn. And this is happening in your 6th house of your habits, your health, your day-to-day routine. And as the North Node moves into this area, this is where you get to start focusing on more of what do you understand about what's healthy and what's going to work for you and how can you implement more of that. And that's how we're basically starting the second quarter of 2020. Now, a few days after that, though, is when Venus is going to retrograde in Gemini. And now Venus is the planet of love and value, money, indulgence. And as she's going through Gemini, she's looking for more mental stimulation. She's looking to be more social, be more adaptable. Venus is looking for fun and excitement. And as she starts to retrograde, this is where you're going to start having that value shift of kind of going from, hey, maybe this was exciting me, now I want to do this. Maybe this is what's calling my name more, and this is what I'm finding more value in. Now, with that value shift, this is going to be happening in your 6th house of your work and your routine and your habits and your health. So you might find yourself kind of switching sides of like, hey, maybe I was doing this as a habit and a routine, and now I'm starting to implement this because this brings me more joy and I get more satisfaction and I actually get the outcome that I'm looking for. But then we get into the second Mercury retrograde of the year, and this one's happening in Cancer. So Mercury retrogrades, of course, like we just said, are all about rethinking, reviewing, replanning, going over things again. And as this is in the sign of Cancer, this is about nurturing. This is about our needs. This is about protecting and saying what needs to be said. But this is happening in your 7th house of relationships, and not just intimate relationships, but formal, professional, casual, whatever it is, individual relationships all together. And as Mercury retrogrades through your 7th house, this is where you're going to start focusing on what needs to be addressed in your relationships and what needs to be said. Now, as we get to the halfway point and we get into the third quarter of 2020 is when we're going to have Saturn retrogress back into Capricorn. And like I said before, Saturn's not done through your first house yet. And as Saturn goes back into Capricorn, your obligations, responsibilities, and walls and problems that you might be facing are going to start coming back again from yourself. It's going to be back again focused on you and what you're doing and who you are. And this is only going to be temporary, but this is going to be your opportunity to really kind of address anything that you didn't get to address beforehand and get it fucking finished. And then a couple weeks after that is when we have Mars enter shadow. And at this point, Mars will be in Aries, where it will be in its home sign. It will be energized. You'll have all this energy to be doing stuff, but as Mars enters its shadow and it starts slowing down before it goes retrograde, this is where you're going to want to have all this energy to do something, and it's going to start kind of not happening. Like your energy is going to kind of go away. But 3 days after Mars enters its shadow, Venus then leaves its shadow and starts to gain new territory. And so during this time, you'll be finding more stimulation, more understanding, and more enjoyment out of what you're doing every single day. So that could be getting a better job that better suits you, or just implementing better habits that make you happier and healthier. But then from about August 4th till about August 27th is when we're going to have Mars start to square Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto. Now, what's frustrating about this is while Mars is in Aries and wanting to do things, it's slowing down, your energy slowing down. And I forgot to mention before that this is happening in your fourth house of your family, of your home life, of your private life. And so as Mars is transiting your fourth house, you might find some frustrations or some problems where you want to be more energized and focused on this area, but you could be having issues coming from yourself. You might be having, your own issues that are kind of hard to address when it comes to your, let's say, your roommates or your parents or your family, whatever it is. And as Mars starts to square Saturn, Jupiter, Pluto, you're going to start seeing where those problems are coming from. But then we end the third quarter with Mars actually stationing retrograde, where before you can start putting your energy into that fourth house area of your family and your home life, you've got to address your issues and what's holding you back from this area. Where are you getting in your own way, and what last minute changes do you need to make so you don't have to do this again? And I think this Mars retrograde is going to be a really big theme or big thing for you guys this year. So definitely keep in mind about this going on next summer. But then as we get into the fourth and final quarter of 2020, this is when it's all happening. This is when all the big stuff is going on. And we're starting it with Mars continuing to retrograde and continuing to square Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter. And this is where you actually address those problems, cut those cords, change your behavior, or maybe take your anger or energy or frustrations away from where they are and place them into something else that's healthier. And then in October, we have the third and final Mercury retrograde this year and happening in Scorpio, which is going to be happening in your 11th house of friendships. And of course, like we've talked about twice already, Mercury retrogrades are about rethinking, revisiting, and reviewing. And as Mercury goes through Scorpio, the sign of the uncut, like the things that are hidden, the things that are in the dark, things that are buried underneath. As Mercury retrogrades through Scorpio, truths might be revealed and secrets might come out, and there might be some miscommunications that kind of sting a little bit. But this is happening in your 11th house of friendships, of groups of people and networks that you associate yourself with. So during this time, you might have some miscommunications in this area, but also be rethinking about who you actually surround yourself with. And then, of course, once we get into November, we're going to have Jupiter come up and conjoin Pluto for the third and final time. And like I said before in the beginning of this video, utilizing what you have. Like Jupiter conjoining Pluto for this third and final time is kind of realizing that if you had that faith, if you kept that trust, and if you kept that initiative and kept it consistent, like you will find yourself in a lot more of a positive opportunity to really change your beliefs about who you are and what makes you you. And that this year is going to define who you are. Like this is a pretty intense year for you specifically, Capricorn. And it's not that you're not going to be able to get through it, but once we get to November, you're going to realize how much you have grown and how much you have changed, especially by the time we get to November. And what's so awesome about Jupiter conjoining Pluto, when you have that realization, the next day Mars stations direct and we get to finally move forward again and take on that energy. And where the past couple months we've been finding roadblocks and being stalled, like now we get to finally take charge and do those things. things again. But then once we get to the end of November and into the beginning of December is when we have the second set of eclipses this year happening again in Gemini and Sagittarius, but this time with the focus more on Sagittarius. And like we talked about before, the South Node in Sagittarius is now in your 12th house of repressed and unacknowledged parts of yourself. So this is going to be a time where beliefs and things that you weren't even aware that you knew about yourself or that you believed about yourself start to come out and come alive. And this is going to be a time to really reflect on what is coming out that has been repressed and not been brought up that needs to now be addressed in a healthy light. But then we finally reach the end of 2020 for the grand finale, and that is Jupiter and Saturn both moving into Aquarius and conjoining each other within just a small window of a few days. And now Jupiter, the planet of expansion, is finally getting some breathing room and getting out of congested Capricorn and going into Aquarius where it has some room to play and it wants to connect yourself to things, and it's going into your second house where you can start to make more money and have more money opportunities and start to receive more things from that area. But with more gifts come more responsibility, and that's what Saturn and Aquarius is all about addressing. And we kind of end 2020 with a big bang with Jupiter and Saturn going into Aquarius, because this is kind of resetting a whole new tone to how we view things. This Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that we're having in December is a huge deal, so I would recommend looking more into it because I don't have enough time today to explain the whole thing to you guys. But that's how we're ending 2020 and going into 21. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for being here and liking and sharing and commenting, subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you guys. Again, if you want a more specific and detailed analysis of what's going on for you this year, please book a reading with me. I'd love to go over your chart and tell you what's going on for you specifically this year. And so with that being said, thank you guys again, and I'll be seeing you next time.